This sikha, though it speaks about the classic topic about chukah, zois chok satoira being something that has to do with mailam and hamadas, yet the Rebbe connects it first of all with the general idea of Tumah and Taharah, and by Bechlal analyzing the halachas of Tumah and Taharah, the Rebbe brings out so much more of what a chukah is, because we find by Tumah and Taharah that it's such a type of it's an absolutes that Rebbe is going to talk about, and that type of or some of the halachas are in absolutes, and
is it live?
So in many of the halachas of para aduma, it's in a way of other gara the garnished, which expresses the idea that it's all about rotzen, and rotzen is also that way. Rotzen is fully powerful without any type of divisions, without any type of separations. That's going to be the main underlying theme of the sikha. Maybe the Medrash HaPasik, mi yitin toher mitame. The Medrash brings that down. For example, where do you see the opposites in Tumah? Baheres kigris ba'adam tami. Even a baheres that's small as a dime makes a person tummy. But if parcha b'kuloi toher, a person that becomes totally white because of the baheres, he's considered toher. And he gives other examples. Simon, he concludes, Mitziva kain migazer kain lo yechider shaloylam was it not Hashem? Amra Kadosh Baruch Hu, the famous line that we always bring down in Sichos and Amarim, Chok kakti gzeira gazarti iata reshoy laver al gzeirasi. Midahevi v'medrash kama in yonam chukim shebetumah v'tara b'chodam machsa ima chuk the parsha saying the para aduma. So that itself is brought together with para aduma. ובהמשך למה שנאמר זויס חוקס התוירה, שמע מינו שהמדרש מפרש שבזויס חוקס התוירה נרמז לא רק החוקה דפרה אדומה, אלא גם החוקה שבכלולס עניין התומס וטהרוסון, שהיא צד השווה שבכל הדוגמאות כולל גם עניין פרה אדומה. So the common denominator of all the tumas of para aduma and all other of these chukim that he enumerates is the idea of Tumah v'Taharah. So that's how the Medrash approaches the chukah of the Torah in our parsha, that it's because it's dealing with Tumah v'Taharah. So the Medrash says the whole idea of Tumah v'Taharah is a chok. Hainu shachukah de para aduma, he loyrak hagzeira shebeprate dine hapara, that we know that in the details of the para aduma there are some very puzzling things that make it into a chok. That general idea of Tumah v'Taharah is also the puzzling part, the chok part. So we see again that the Chazal compare the entire idea of Tumah v'Taharah to what we have at the beginning of our parsha, Zois Chuk Torah. ובכלולוס יויסר בלשון הרמב"ם דבר ברור וגלוי שהתומס והטהרס גזירס הכוסווי ואינון מדברים שדייתי של אדם אחראסה. It's not something that a person's mind can come up with or figure it out. והרי מכלל החוקים זה מרס אם יויס בזויס חוקס התוירה המדובר בשייכס לתומס מס וטהרה. So it's seemingly talking about one specific level of tumah. וכפשטס הכסובים Hareza bol rames gam ala chukah shebachlolos ha'inyan the Tumah v'Taharah, as we see from the different medrashim, from the different Amar Chazal, that the general idea of Tumah v'Taharah is what we're referring to as a chok over here, at least according to the medrash. Oisbeis yedua. So the Rebbe is going to apply this, how this applies even these days when we don't have Tumah v'Taharah. כל עניין שבתורה יש בהרה בעבודת כל אחד ואחד מבני ישראל בכל מקום ובכל זמן וכהלושן והתורה היא נצחis, like the Lashon and Tanya is V'gam ha-mitzvos v'dinei ha-Torah shenoigim rak b'zman shebeis hamikdash kayim chulu. So one shouldn't think that it's only the times of the Beis Hamikdash that these mitzvahs apply, and now it's not nitzchi anymore. Hareza rak b'negiel l'kiyumam b'gashmis, that we say that we cannot fulfill it now that we have no Beis Hamikdash. Aval beruchnis gam mitzvahs elu hein lamayla ma'agbolos d'zman u'mokim, and therefore there's lessons and there's ideas of those mitzvahs that apply now as well. Kamoikim in Didan, iker kiyum dinei Tumah and Taharah, ubezman shel Beis Hamikdash kayim, that's in the Gashmis. Aval toichan in yonam ba'avoida haruchnis, hu kayim v'shayach b'chol zman u'mokim. That's one point. The Rebbe adds a very interesting kvetch. This is something that the Rebbe a lot of times brings down in different sichos and in different places, that every part of Torah, even those mitzvahs that don't apply now, apply beruchnis. Here he wants to say even to whom does it apply? It applies to someone that just knows the name of the parsha. Even someone that doesn't know the details and cannot understand the details of the parsha, he just knows the word Chok, the name of the parsha, which is just a very simple person. To him the Hayra as well applies. That Torah is from the word Hayra. In other words, they are learning from it even though they don't know what they're saying. There the halacha is mevarchim rakish umevin alimud. Mezeh muvan asher hayra l'chol echad ve'echad hi loima prati dinim shem l'mayla masagasi shal ish pashut ela meklalas ha'inyan de zayis chukas ha'torah. Because if you're going to learn out from the detailed halachas, let's say one of the things that the Rebbe always brings down is about the person that's Tameh becomes Tahir by the Paraduma, and the person that's Mazah, he himself becomes. But then you have to be already someone that knows a little bit and understands a little bit about the halachas of the Paraduma. The Rebbe wants to bring a Hirah from something that's applicable to everybody that might not even know any of this. Why is it called the Torah? What does it have to do with the rest of the Torah? There is something about Paraduma that reflects and impacts and has to do with the entire Torah. What is that? Mitzvos li yoisa chuka va'afilu be'erech shara mitzvos shebesuga chukim. In other words, as we know, and he's going to point out later even more so, in chukim itself there are different levels of chukim. There's chukim that have part of it is understood and part of it is not understood. Para adumba is way a chayk even in comparison to other chukim. L'chein ubezeh gufi close kol mitzvos, because para adumba is a chayk. That's why it's Zois Chok Torah. In other places, the Rebbe asked this as a question. How could that be? Torah has all these different parts. There's parts that are chukim, there are parts that are Eidos, parts that are Mishpatim, parts that are logical, parts that are supra-rational. How can the mitzvah paraduma be Zois Chok Torah? Because this idea of chayk really is a common thread that's in all mitzvahs, even the mitzvahs of Eidos and Mishpatim. Vatam. What's the reason for that? Why is that the close of kol mitzvahs? Kol ha-mitzvos mehusan hu rotzna el shalom mailom b'chinas chachma v'tam v'gam ha-mitzvos sheyesh aleim tam harei ein ha'inyan shemehusan hu ha-chachma ela sherotzna elyon baruch hu nimshach v'nislabesh b'chinas chachma v'tam aval mehusan ha'atzmi gam la'achar ha'hislapshus hu rotzna elyon. We know the lashon of Chassidus is that Keser, that's the Hashem's Ratzon. Keser is Taf Reish Chaf, 620. 613 mitzvahs deraisa, 7 mitzvahs derabbanan. In other words, all the mitzvahs began first in Keser. Keser is higher than Chachma. Then some of the mitzvahs came down in the level of Eidos and Mishpatim in a way that could be understood, that it's logical, that it's rational. And some mitzvahs bypassed or just went through Chachma b'derech Ma'ivir. It wasn't a slavish in Chachma. So what does that tell us? That even those mitzvahs that came down in Chachma, that's only that it came down through Chachma, but it didn't start off in Chachma. At its core, it's a level of Ratzon.
The Chukim show that because they skipped.
Not Chukim show that. When we say Zois Chukas HaTorah, that informs us that every part of Torah is really a Chok. That even those parts of Torah that can be understood logically, comes the word Zois Chukas HaTorah. The entire Torah is really has this common thread that it starts off as being a Chok. ולכן, קיומן של כל המצוות, גם אויסן המבונס על פיתם ודעס, צריך להיות באופן זה דווקא. צריך לקיימן לא מפני שהשכל והדעס מחייבן, אלא כנוסח ברכס המצוות מפני שציוונו, מפני שכך גוזר רצון העליון. We don't say, Baruch atah Hashem, asher kiddushanu mitzvosov, and now we will do this because it makes sense, this mitzvah. No, it's all a tzivui. It's all because of Kabbalah soil, because of Ratzon Elyon. Zoi kavanas hakosov, zois chukas ha'toyra. Im sham mitzvahs nachlakas b'derech klal legimel sugim, chukim Eidos and Mishpatim, harei mehusan ha'atzmis shel kol mitzvahs ha'toyra, gam ha'sugim the Eidos and Mishpatim, hi chukam. V'lo yoid. What's the emphasis on Zois? As we said before, there's different levels of Chok. You know what type of level of Chok all the mitzvahs are. They're the ultimate Chok. They're like the Chok of Paraduma. Zois Chukas HaTorah. Chachuka the Paraduma. That the Chuk of Paraduma is unique. Shafilu shloima chacham mikol adam amr al zeh amarti ech k'mavir Chokim mani. The Medrash brings down I'll call Torah and all the mitzvahs are madati aleim except when it came to Paraduma. So that shows that that's the ultimate chayk. If Shlomo HaMelech HaChacham Mikol Adam couldn't understand it, that means it's the ultimate chayk. And that level, which is the ultimate chayk, is the common thread in all the mitzvahs of the Torah. So now the Rebbe is going to apply this, how this idea has to do eventually with the entire concept of Paraduma. First, not the Paraduma, but Tumah and Taharah. Like we said before, that Tumah and Taharah is this type of other garnished. It's a total and complete thing because it expresses a Ratzon that comes in a total fashion. Mitzad inyan zeh, Ratzon v'chukim shebemitzvos, matzinu kama v'kama dvarim shem b'shaveh b'chol ha-mitzvos. If mitzvahs were only based on logic, or even if some mitzvahs were based on logic, so then the logical mitzvahs would have some type of distinction between them. Maybe they shouldn't even be called mitzvahs, for the word tzivui, tzivanu. It should be called only Eidos, only Mishpatim. But rather, there is a common denominator. V'ad shamar chazal loitesh, yoshev v'shoikel mitzvah shel Torah. Mevur b'kam mekaymes ha'hefresh ben koyach ha'ratzon l'koyach ha'chachma, u'b'chlal ha'koyches pnimim shel adam. Everything from chachma and below. Ha'chachma ba b'yischalkus. Heim b'yischalkus kloli, dein seichel echad doimel chavere. That is one type of differentiation. V'hein b'yischalkus prati b'chol askola gufa, whenever I have an idea, first of all, one idea is distinct and different from another idea, and my connection with one idea is different than my connection with another idea. And then in an idea itself, there are different grades and levels in the idea. There's parts of the idea that are more superficial, parts of the idea that are more in depth. I got to work my way up through an idea. There's different steps, there are different divisions. Loi b'yischalkus kloli, v'loi b'yischalkus prati. V'hainu the levad zoi she'ein b'yischalkus b'prati anyonim, she'b'chol prat she'adavar she'roitze b'y. Hu b'shavim, let's say, I want to have such and such a type of house. So if it comes from the level of Ratzon, not from the level of the person's chachma, from his Ratzon atzmi that's higher than chachma, so then it doesn't make a difference if it's a small detail about the design of the doorknobs, or it's a big detail about how the house is built. The Ratzon is equal all over. Eine mischalek v'yischalkos kloli b'inyanim sharatzen b'hem the noimer shebedavar zeh haratzen u'bayfen kach u'bedavar zeh haratzen u'bayfen kach ki ein haratzen mishtanel fi oifen ha'inyanim sharatzen shebehem. Again, we're always talking about a ratzen that's beyond seichel. A ratzen that's created by seichel, so then, since the seichel understands, for example, that the walls and the roof of the house are more important than the doorknobs, so if the whole will of his house is only based on seichel, yes, so there'll be a difference.
It's like a ratzon to have a working roof as opposed to a working
Doorknob. Exactly.
Like something color and taste. Like
Exactly. If it's a matter of taste, and I have a taste in the beauty of this house, if a small little thing is off, like the doorknob is just not matching right, my whole interest is like completely lost. I used to there was this guy on my block in LA that I think I remember them twice or three times. They have remodeled their house. They remade the steps going from the sidewalk to the walkway that goes to the house.
Steps there?
Yeah, and it wasn't even, it's on the corner. I don't know if you might have even noticed when you were there. It's on the corner, it's just simple, it's concrete. It's not it's like designed or anything. Just simple concrete. They redid it twice, two times or three times. That's a Ratz Natsmi. What is it? It's steps, it's concrete, it's no big deal. No, it's not the way it's meant to be. They're not Chachma of the Eibishter. They are derived, even the Mitzvos Tarapi Seichel are the Ratzon Elyon. Ein behem is Chalkos. V'lechein lefamim, miktsas me'a mitzvah eina klum, u'lefamim chelik me'a mitzvah hikikulam. That sometimes you could have a small little thing, and that could be considered like everything. Why? Because we can't use the terms of small and big. When we talk about Ratzon, size, measurements, limitations, divisions don't apply. You don't know what he's talking about.
It should be the opposite, no?
It should be.
If it's something of Ratzon, then even if
that should be a totality.
Off,
and that point is actually going to bring later on. That point is actually going to bring later on. But over here he's going to say that the fact that chelik ma mitzvah hi kikula, that's the emphasis. He's not saying that the chelik of the mitzvah matters, but if it's a chelik of the mitzvah, you should say, okay, if it's a quarter of the mitzvah, so then I should get like a quarter credit of doing it. I accomplished a quarter of what had to be accomplished. No, we find sometimes that a quarter of something...
A quarter of something actually work if the quarter of the doorknob is the right color and the rest of it's not the right color.
You're right. In that type of case, it doesn't work. But in type of Ratzon, it works. Let's say there are halachas where we say, Mitzos hayom kekuloi.
Right.
When it comes to Avelis, comes to other things. So, it has to be 7 days. Why Mitzos hayom kekuloi? Because it's not about, as soon as it's like etzem, k'shtofes Mitzos, k'shtofes bekuloi. You already had one of the things, you grasped one of it, then you have it entirely. The main part over here of these two sides of it, that either it's nothing or it's everything.
Emphasizing the fact that it's
Exactly. It's either nothing or everything. There's no pieces. You can't break a ratzon into pieces. The Tumah and Taharah. The This is very geschmack, the different examples that he brings over here, how Tumah and Taharah is either or. Min ha-Torah I efsher sha-Tumah tochel rak al Mitzos haguf. V'im noga adam be'echad me'ivara b'davar ha-Tameh, ha-Metameh, nit my days a kol haguf. There's no, his hand is Tameh. It's the entire person is Tameh. And again, you see the emphasis on Min ha-Torah. The emphasis on Min ha-Torah is like he says in the footnote, because the fact that you have to wash your hands, Tumas Yadayim, that's only the Rabbanon. Mid'oraisa, there's no type of thing that only your hands are going to become tummy. Either you become tummy even if you touch with your pinky, or you don't become tummy at all. Beis, another example of this, Ha'adam nitbe ayidei negia kol shehi ba'tumah Hainu rak shayches chitzoynis v'shitchias la'adavar matame. He could touch, let's say, the skin or the most outermost layer of that thing. Ubecholze nitmahu aideze ba'oisei atoikiv shu nitma b'chalasi davar tami. It's a fascinating thing. When a person eats, let's say, one of the shmeina shrotzim that's metame, so he eats a sheretz, it's entering in him, it's becoming dama basa kipsari. Yet, it doesn't make a difference if he eats it or he just touched it. He touched the outer skin, he becomes the same tum. Gimel, ba'oimek yoiser, b'negia zu atzma, ein nafkemina ben shenaga ba b'mezid, or b'shoigig, or afilu ba'oines. The Rachmana Patre by other things, because over here it doesn't make a difference. Your intention, your mind, it's a totality of it. The famous story that they say about a certain not from quote unquote rabbi. The person came with a shailub and a basar b'cholov that they were cooking meat and it splashed on the milk, or the milk splashed on the meat. So you want to know who started, did the milk. Was it the milk's fault or was it the meat's fault? Whatever. In other words, it doesn't make a difference whose fault it is when it comes to Tumah and Taharah. Zoysa meres, loy rak negia kolshi begashmis, ela afilu kishagam beruchnius, loy hoysa zoys kim negia, shal shayches rechoyke ma'oi, sharei hoysa shaloy bekavanas, yagam hepek retzoyne bechol zenit mal yodam. So there's a physical distance and there's a spiritual distance. What's called a spiritual distance? I had no intention in this whatsoever. I had no meaning to do so. I was forced to do so. Doesn't make a difference. I become tummy. Dalet, gama teitzah shel atuma banitma adam muchletesi b'negel l'shaychus l'kedusha. The reason we have to emphasize b'negel l'shaychus l'kedusha is because we do know there's different grades of tumah. There is a tumas mes and tumas this type of tumah and that type of tumah, and therefore the results of how much time he has to go through or what process he has to go through to become tahir. But as far as the person now being removed from the world of holiness, from not being able to interact with holiness, there's no difference. Eina tumah geremes beirach esorim prati b'shaychus l'kedusha, ela shu yoytze aideze from the whole idea of kedusha. Nifsaka kol shaychusay hagluya linyanim shebekdusha zu asur lechel davar kodesh davar shel kodesh ein yachol li is dama baskip sari va'oid yaiser el amigdash loy tava. You don't make differentiations. You say, well, it's only this type of tumah. If the tumah's mass, he can't go in. But if it's a different type of tumah, he could go. No. V'atam lechol.
It's interesting. He's pointing that out. So he's saying the way you become tamei is equal, both by touch and by eating, and
right.
What it gives to you is also on the other side the same. He's like,
yes,
he's playing that
from both sides of the equation. Yeah. More so, even though in Mitzvos of Eidos and Mishpatim, there's also Ratzon Elyon, like we said before, but it doesn't shine there begoli. What you see is the level of Chachma. But in Tumah and Taharah, it's totally Gzeira. V'lachein nira v'nikir b'hem begoli aheder achiluk v'ashini ben rav l'ma'ot ein hefresh mitzad oifen shaychus ha'adam la tumah shagam aydei shaychus chitzoynis hein begashmis, like we said before, negia ba'alma, or whether the shaychus is chitzoynis beruchnis v'hein beruchnis afilu la'oinsay la davar tamei tumah hareyu nitma lagamri hein begashmis kol gufay ke'echad v'hein beruchnis hefsek shayches gluya l'kedusha. He's completely cut off from kedusha now. Vav inyan anal b'avodas kol echad v'echad amar azal, like we said before, lo tehei yoshev v'shoikel b'mitzvosah shel Torah v'avizoyer b'mitzvah kala k'b'chamura da'ala adam li'azoyer b'chol mitzvah b'shavah v'av sheyesh makom litoin eich yitochen sheyizoyer b'digduk kal shel divrei seifrim ba'oisa hazehirus. You yourself called it chamura shebachamura, and yet you're going to tell me you got to go the same approach. He easy heroes bedigdu kal b'divrei seifrim gufa he negia lavad bara ve'eich shayich l'damoisa la easy heroes b'chamura shebechamuras In the very place where it says, don't concern yourself about Kals and Chamuris. So Torah itself calls it Kals and Chamuris, and at the same time it says that you shouldn't act upon this Kals and Chamuris. If your approach is logic, you say, what's it? It's a doorknob. Yes, chilukim madreges and mitzvahs, chukim, eidos, mishpatim, kalas, chamuras. Mitzad mechus ha-mitzvahs, shu rotzen ha-elyon, ein behem chilukim. Uba'avoidas ha-odom ha-makayim ha-mitzvahs. Lefi erech v'chilukei bechinas ha-bgam benefesh chulu, kach im chilukei bechinas ha-miruk va-oynish. Val derech zelin schar mitzvah chulu, that it's dependent upon the level, the type of mitzvah, and so on. Aber mitzad nekuda ha'ikri shel ha-mitzvahs, sha'idei kiyuman shel ha-mitzvahs, nasa mitzvah meloshen tzavsa v'chibur ma'kadosh baruch hu, hareze b'chol ha-mitzvahs, it doesn't make a difference, kal or chamura. V'lachein gam negia kala b'davar shu heipach rotzna elyon, negasi l'chlolis is kashrusei b'lakus. And that's why you have the situation that the Rebbe is signing over here to Tanya Perich Chavdalad. The Alter Rebbe over there in Tanya speaks about how when a person thinks into the fact that he's willing to give up his life, not to bow down to Avodah Zarah, so when he thinks about the fact that in every mitzvah that a person tears himself away from the Eibishter by not doing the mitzvah or doing an Aveda, it's tearing himself away from the Eibishter in the same way, like it would be tearing himself away from Avodah Zarah. So that's the approach, that it's about the bond of a person with the Eibishter. Or like in other places that it brings down, that a person that stands in front of the king and he makes a little sign with his hand, he makes a circle in the air to somebody, he's chayiv heipach hachayim. Why? What did he do already? Because in the place where he's openly in front of the king, so then the total iskashrus of him with the king is revealed, and anything that shows a heder iskashrus, a heder hakavod, is already disconnects him from Chaim. Hayra anal shayeches ubemele gam nidreshes and called echad ve'echad gam me'aposhe pshutim. Like we said in the beginning, v'lachein ba hayra zu meklolos hanoisid in Tumah and Taharah v'loy ma'prati dinim shebazeh ki shayeches hi gam le'ilut lo'yodem ha'ka'amni kanal siv beis. Hergish anal b'kiyum ha'mitzvos shegam zehirus b'digdu kalu davar negeya l'klalos eiskashus belakus ba mitzad etzem hanashama shalamayla mitam vadas ukepizgam hayidua Yehudi ein roitza vein yachli is nifred malakus vehergish zeh weitzel kol echad ve'echad b'nei Yisrael. So not every Yid may not have the seichel to understand the Mishpatim mitzvahs, may not have the seichel to understand the Eidos and the Mishpatim, but every single Yid has that iskashrus that comes from the Etzem HaNeshama that he wants to be connected to and with the Ratzon of the Eibishter. And the Rebbe also is mitzayim that this is the famous thing, that also another thing that's hinted in Chukas HaTorah, Chukah from the word Chakika, that really the idea of a Yid with the Torah and a Yid with the Eibishter is engraved in the person, and therefore because it's engraved, so it's not something separate from him, and therefore it's not possible for him to measure and say a little bit more, a little bit less. It's part of my essence. It's part of who I am. And therefore, there needs to be times where he uses his intellect, there needs to be times where he does it just plain Kabbalah soil and so on. But still in all, what's one of the times that a person needs to be ma'orer that? In his nefesh, that's the auspicious time when we're supposed to be ma'orer this. So therefore, since I'm learning chukas, so this is ma'orer this by me. In other words, even though, like we said before, a person cannot necessarily experience this every day and every moment of the day, still in all, the times that I can try to experience this type of connection with the Eibishter's Ratzon, that every single detail should matter to me the smallest as much as the biggest, that impacts and leaves a mark and an impression even on those times when I don't actually feel this. Oz margish goydel achoymer v'chesaron benegias mashu bedavar bilti rotzin. It doesn't even want to have to do with the most minor and smallest thing that could be. So, by the way, there's the other sichos that the Rebbe connects with Chokas, with Yud Beis Tammuz, because Chokas is usually the Shabbos from which Yud Beis Tammuz follows. So the Rebbe always connects it with the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that general, his whole Mesiras Nefesh in Russia was for things that, and what he demanded Mesiras Nefesh were things that are not the three things. And the Rebbe even brings down that other Gdolim disagreed with the Frierdiker Rebbe and said, what are you telling people to go on Mesiras Nefesh for these things? Why are you going on Mesiras Nefesh for these things? There's three things that you have to be Moser Nefesh. It doesn't say anywhere you have to be Moser Nefesh to send your kids to from a school. You don't have to be Moser Nefesh to have Malamdim teach kids. You don't have to be Mesiras Nefesh to build a mikveh and so on. And also the Rebbe brings a famous story with the Frierdiker Rebbe concerning Shabbos. That when they told him, it was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, they told him you'd be able to go out, this was on a Thursday, was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and they told him, you will go out from prison today to go travel to Kostroma for exile, and you have like 6 hours to get your stuff together, and tonight you have to take the train. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asked the people in charge in the prison, when am I going to arrive in Kostroma? So they told him, you're going to arrive on Shabbos. So he said, if I'm arriving on Shabbos, I'm not going out of prison. So he told them, it could be that way. If you don't decide to leave when we tell you to leave, you might just stay here, period. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. And of course, obviously, it was a very big danger for him and so on. And the Rebbe goes on into many details and says, first of all, the whole idea of he doesn't know what's going to be in those 6 hours. He could have missed the train. He could have used those 6 hours to try to influence them. Why do you have to say I'm going to stay in the prison? He'll go out, and then if they make him go on the train, so then he'll go back to the prison, whatever. Maybe in those 6 hours he'll be able to manage. Maybe while he's on the train, Chassidim will be able to manage to pull something off. And even if Chas v'Shalom he manages to be on the train and the train is riding on Shabbos, again, it's only a drabanan to go off of the train, and maybe he could refuse to leave the train. Whatever, there were many different options, many different ways, and still in all the Frierdiker Rebbe had this Mesiras Nefesh, which means Aratzon Shalom Aylam Matan V'das, on a minor detail, that's what mattered to him. Now the Rebbe brings us out concerning how we have to influence another also when it comes to small details. Oisches, Ayro, Anal Yesh, Nagam, Ba'avodas Ha'odom, Mazulas. Kish Mis'asik, Lekarev, Esliban, Shemoneh Yisrael, Hashem, Terosim, Mitzvos, Yitochem, V'Yahar, Beliboy. Shim Yala B'Yadeh, Lifal, Al Hazulas, Yizor, B'Mitzos Chamuras, Ay Klolos HaTorah, Mitzvos, Dayay. It's big things that I have to worry about. V'Hein Hechrech, Sheishtadl, B'Yishtadlos HaGdoila, V'Harbe, Shehiyah, Hazulas, Nizar, Gam, B'Digdo Kalshal, Divrei Seifrim, Ad Mitzvah Nefesh. To mamish like squeeze him and bother him and nudge him about every single detail. Valzeh ba mainanal kishem kishehu betzad habilti rotzi chaydei negia kala bedavara hareza olav goyach hashom bechlolus haiskashus hakadosh baruch hu al derech zeh betzad hatoiv yitachen chaydei sheyifal al azula zehirus beinyan shel Torah mitzvos shehu bebchinas negia kala Yotziyai Aidezem and Matzavoi Ba'oimek Tachas V'Yaleu Maila Mailad La'oimek Roim. This is an amazing word. He's saying that you don't know. It could be this minor thing, this little tiny thing. Think about it. What native Shabbos Kodesh is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Still in all the Rebbe wants that they should light, that they should get the women and girls to light neshek. And what? And the Rebbe tells over the story about the little girl that lit the Shabbos candles, and then they stopped to make kiddush, and then they say, how can we make kiddush and keep the television on, etc., etc., etc. So here you see what the Rebbe is talking about. It's neshek. It's not a deir isa. It's not a iser karis. It's nothing. It's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Still, and that every person should light, and even the girl should light, not just the mother. Still in all, that small minor thing could raise him up from oimik tachas la oimik roim.